Hi, and good afternoon. Thanks to everyone for taking time, valuable time from your schedules to join us for a conversation about presidential transitions, the role of technology in enacting federal policy and serving citizens better. We're a week away from Election Day, but both President Trump and also former Vice President Biden have transition teams that have been working in earnest to help turn policy promises into policy agendas and begin the difficult work of preparing for governing. For the first time, the presidential transition processes have received technology-focused agency review briefs. These are documents that have been written by technologists and policymakers who themselves served in agencies in the federal government. And what they do is they help assess the current technological capability and capacity, critical items for the first 200 days, and key technical leadership positions for 2021. Both of these memos were handed to both presidential transitions as well as offerings for briefings. We're going to be discussing what was in those memos today, what were some of the insights, what were some of the findings. Why is this critical? Why is this important? Well, it's very difficult right now. The challenge of modern policymaking rests not in the development of new ideas or grand ambitions, but rather in their implementation. And some of the boldest policy ambitions over the last decade have been derailed due to a failure to understand how technology works or just failing to simply implement it properly. And we see recent examples. Healthcare.gov is one example, but in recent months, just because of COVID, you've seen state unemployment benefit systems crashing and people unable to access critical needed benefits. We have seen the COVID response hampered because in some instances, the CDC was relying on information being faxed to them during this critical time. State unemployment systems have also been unable to handle not just the surge of applications, but also some of the new formulas that both Congress and the administration have been thinking about in terms of how to do a next round of expanded unemployment benefits. And then more recently, we just heard about $8 billion in frauds in terms of state systems that were just unable to catch different types of fraud and other types of problems with their systems there. And so you could just, the Paycheck Protection Program is another example where great program to help stabilize small businesses. But one of the challenges was that the small business lending program, the 7A lending program, and the technical aspect of it just kept crashing. And it was really difficult for lenders to get their applications in because the system kept crashing. So helping to address this is the Tech Talent Project. It's a nonpartisan nonprofit project dedicated to increasing the ability for the US government to recruit modern technical leaders in order to achieve critical economic policy and human outcomes. We're going to be talking that today, and joining us is the wonderful Cass Madison, who comes from state policy background and is now the acting executive director for the Tech Talent Project. So Cass, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
No, tell us a little bit about the project. I know we have a presentation, and then we'll go into a panel to sort of discuss it. But let's start off with you first.
That sounds great. And if you wouldn't mind sharing your screen, I have a couple slides I want to run through for you folks. So as John said, I'm Cass Madison. I'm acting executive director at the Tech Talent Project. And our purpose is to essentially help government get better at technology. And we do this by focusing on recruiting modern technical leaders who might be willing to serve in an administration in a leadership role. So when I think about what's going on in the country today, whether it's the pandemic or the social unrest that we experienced in the spring and the summer, the wildfires on the West Coast, it's clear that our country is navigating multiple crises. We're also in the middle of the election, maybe some of you have heard, only a few days away now. And regardless of who wins, it will bring with it a unique set of transitions that need to take place at the federal, state, and local levels. And not only are we all experiencing this at a meta level, I think families across the country are experiencing millions of little or big transitions on their own, whether it's loss of family members, loss of jobs. There are many people who are going through great personal periods of instability. And when I think about our country and our democracy, one of the cornerstones of what we do is, government's ability to provide day-to-day stability, both at this national and personal level, while also being prepared to respond to any crisis that may arise. And it's the year 2020. We can't do any of this effectively without technology. So in short, our government runs on tech. But our systems have really left America vulnerable. You know, tech innovation over the past 2 decades has really changed the way we do business, and government hasn't been able to keep up. As John mentioned, you saw it when the unemployment websites crashed. You saw it when we sent stimulus checks to people who are deceased. You know, I think when tech isn't done well in government, we don't only miss an opportunity to deliver services efficiently and effectively, but we can do real harm. And you know, again, while great leaps in innovation happen during periods of crisis, it's often the painstaking work that happens behind the scenes during periods of stability that really define how well we react in a crisis. So what's the challenge? You can see in this chart, America's systems are not just aging, they're old and outdated. There's systems that we have today that are the backbone of the way we operate the federal government that are 50+ years old. So that's a problem, but it's not the only problem. Government is also often using antiquated approaches to software development and project management, which really continue to result in the failure of some of these high-profile modernization efforts at the federal, state, and local levels. And so the challenge before us is, how do we not only have the great ideas, but figure out how to implement them appropriately? And the vulnerabilities really add up. You can go to the next slide. At the federal level, we're spending $90 billion a year on tech. And without the key ability to implement our tech efforts effectively, it means that we're not getting the right return on investment of those dollars. So we know that any 21st century presidential agenda must prioritize technology to accomplish its goals. And this is particularly true in 2021, given the multiple crises that we're facing. So we know what the problem is, then, you know, what's the recipe for success? And we really feel like this technology roadmap is that recipe for success. And there's really 2 things on this roadmap. One is making sure that we have the right people, and 2 is making sure that we're taking the right actions. So at the Tech Talent Project, I already mentioned this, we're really focused on thing 1. You know, we're developing a network of tech and tech adjacent leaders who would be willing to serve in a 2021 administration. And I'll just say we're primarily focused on political appointments right now, but that's not the whole story. We are working with partners and thinking more broadly about the pipeline as a whole to make sure that talented technologists at all levels of their careers who are interested in service have a path in. The second piece is what John started to talk about and what we'll spend the bulk of today discussing, and it's really the tech transition memos. So we've worked with leadership from folks on this panel, including John and others, with 80+ experts in tech and federal government to ensure that new leaders coming in 2021 understand the tech priorities and challenges that their agencies face and have a roadmap for the first 200 days. And so these briefs focus on a set of key agencies, mostly involved in COVID recovery and response, although the content in there is broader than that. And it makes sure that that incoming leaders have information such as, you know, what's the status of the current tech projects and priorities, what are the critical positions that need to be filled, what are key actions that can be taken that can really build momentum and help make meaningful progress quickly. And while we'll get into the memos a little bit more, in reflecting on the work as a whole, there were a few common themes that came out that I just would love to share with you before we get started. So the first one is no surprise, given what we've already talked about so far today, but we need to be appointing modern tech-savvy leaders into key leadership roles in tech, procurement, and operations. And key approaches here include, you know, we want to make sure that we're pairing non-technical leadership with modern technical advisors and make sure that they're at the table together for policy and operational decision-making and planning. We want to prioritize strong data leadership, especially in agencies pushing for AI and machine learning. And we want to grow the modern tech pipeline at all levels. and invest time and resources in upskilling America's workforce, which feels like we have a particularly important moment in time right now to take advantage of that, as so many people are sort of between things. Second key takeaway is focused on building a robust and secure modern data infrastructure. So data collected and maintained at the federal government is a national asset, and it's held in trust for the American people, and it's a powerful tool for advancing science and innovation. And so in 2021, the administration should really prioritize a modern data infrastructure that enables robust, secure data sharing both within agencies, across agencies, and with the American public. Key takeaway 3 is really about doubling down on agency gains. And I think this is a really critical one. We spend so much time talking about what's going wrong and failures in technology projects. It's also really important for incoming leaders to spend time focusing on the bright spots and understand what projects are in flight that are critical to agency success. And this is particularly important during periods of transition, which can derail agencies' digital transformation efforts. So for example, in the Office of Veterans Affairs, they're undergoing 3 major technical overhauls that are all critical to the effectiveness of the agency. So the 2021 administration should really prioritize making those work. Key takeaway 4 is that ineffective technical budgeting and procurement practices underlie much of our IT project failures, not just at the federal level. This is true at the state and local level as well. And so there's really 2 things here. One is changing this requires ensuring that procurement managers in government are informed digital and technical buyers, and that they're focused and crafting procurements that not only meet operational needs as well as checking the compliance boxes. And then on the budgeting side, we really need to move away from this idea of large one-time investments in IT projects to a model of consistent investments in technology year after year. Key takeaway 5 is about adopting agile human-centered product development models. And this is all about embracing modern technical principles and practices, including the implementation of secure and reliable cloud services, human-centered design, agile and iterative software development practices. And this is really going to help us make sure that the technology that we're building not only works, but works for the people who are actually going to use the technology. And then finally, the takeaway 6 is that there are high impact changes that can be made right now. I think, we talk a lot about the pace of change in government, and it's true that much of the work to remake government culture and hiring practices related to tech is long term. But there are things that can be done right away to dramatically improve services, the flow of information to decision makers. I won't go into them here. They are detailed in the executive summaries of the memos, and hopefully we'll get to some of them on the panel. But the key message here is that there are quick wins, and the 2021 administration should go after them. So I think for many, the key list of takeaways may not be surprising, but as John said, this is the first time that this kind of knowledge has been compiled in one place and in a manner that's easily digestible by an incoming administration. And reflecting on all of the content, I think one thing that comes across loud and clear is that leadership and talent matter. And so with that, I'm really excited to turn it back over to John. I think he's going to queue up a video for us quickly and then to get into the panel discussion.
It's important that we have technology in government because every policy and program going forward, a component will be tech.
There are so many people who are doing such good work, who are working on making sure that the services that are supposed to serve American people are functioning. And sometimes it's the technology that prevents these things from happening.
What's really important is that going forward, when government is trying to figure out what it does next, the table of decision makers doesn't just include policymakers. You also need technologists at the table.
And we need to get together, break these silos, and work on all the hard problems together.
And there's so much room right now for technologists in government to help modernize our infrastructure, to help them think in more sophisticated ways about how technology lives in our society.
And I think that that's the great thing about public service is that underlying every day the work you're doing, you're having an impact.
There is still so much work to be done.
Great. Thank you so much, Cass. Cass, how can people find these memos that we've talked about?
We can make sure to send out a link to our website. We have the executive summaries as well as other information on the Tech Talent Project and ways to sign up if you're interested in service yourself. You can find that all on our website, and we can make sure to send out the link.
Okay, wonderful. That's great. What I'd love to do now is pull in some other people into the conversation, and then also give our listeners some directions for how to send us in questions. But first, joining Cass and myself, we have Mina Sheng, who is the founding member of U.S. Digital Services and also the founding executive director of the U.S. Digital Service at HHS. She's now a VP of Policy and Government Affairs at Devoted Health. We have Nicole Wong, who's just saw in that video and has been a great co-lead on this project. She is the former U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer at the White House. And we also have David Almasy, a good friend who I got to know at the U.S. Department of Education. He's also the first and former White House Internet Director. So he was back at the White House when we kept calling this eGov and has some great insights. For those of you, what we're going to do is we're going to have just a quick conversation amongst ourselves, but we want you to be a part of it. So if you have questions, the best way to get us questions is to email Olivia Shaw at olivia.shaw@aei.org, or you can talk with us on Twitter with the hashtag #TechTransition. So send Olivia an email at olivia.shaw@aei.org or through Twitter at hashtag tech transition. So, well, again, just thanks to all of you for being with us today. Super excited, super appreciative of everyone taking time out of your busy schedules, especially during this election season. But Nicole, I mean, you've been part of this process since day one. You've been seeing the iterations after iterations and drafts of the memos. What were some of your big observations and takeaways from this process?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, John, for being my partner in this journey that we've had, putting together these papers, which are really quite remarkable. So let me first comment on like how far we've come in the last decade in understanding the technology needs in government. Because I think that that's an enormous landmark of where we are. And it's why the important work of Cass and the whole Tech Talent Project have really distilled those lessons at this point, and that's so useful at this moment for our government. So thanks to everyone for all the work they've been putting in here. I think when I think about like across all of the agency papers that we did, and just for clarification, if you go and look at the memos, we chose 9 of the agencies that we thought would be most important to the administration, whichever one it is in 2021, and with the priority that we knew they were going to be having to address COVID response and recovery. And so we chose the most relevant agencies for that to look at what their technical capacity was, meaning not only their technical infrastructure, but the talent pool that exists there to help deliver on policy initiatives. And each agency has its own specific particularities, right, about what kind of system it has, where its needs are. The Department of Education, for example, and the student loan infrastructure there is a super important one that has been underway for years. That's different than the Treasury and IRS issues that we saw kind of have some hiccups trying to deploy stimulus checks over the last year. So I think we were trying to identify for each of these agencies what's important. What I came away with when I read all together is that there are certain consistent issues that we probably need to address not only at the agency level, but overall as government. And I'd highlight 3 that Cass kind of ran through a series. There were 3 that were particularly important. One is procurement, and really reforming the way that we buy technology and build technology in government so that it matches the way we develop modern technology, which tends to be more iterative as opposed to like spec out the entire thing at the front end and then have a finished product that you never touch again. We're not building a ship, right? This is actually a living piece of software that adjusts as we move forward as a government. And so we need our procurement processes to reflect that. The second is data governance, which is a space that I've worked on for a long time in the private sector, as well as when I served in government. And how we, particularly these days, how we acquire and collect and use and share and protect data is so important. And if we think about like data as being one of the greatest assets we have in government to measure our own performance, to deliver on our mission, to spark innovation in the private sector, we really need to make sure that we're worthy of trust in the governance of that data. So that was the second one. And then the third is actually the mission of the Tech Talent Project, which is talent. We need talent at absolutely every level. And as much as we need to go and find the sources for it, find the people who are the right skill set, I actually think we need to be paying attention to how government is open to receiving them. We need a culture in government that is willing to give some place to technology. And I kind of view a lot of what we did in these memos as creating that space for the conversation of where do we need our next wave of tech talented people to come in.
That's great. I mean, Mina, I just want to, something Nicole said is that these memos are sort of built around what are going to be the most urgent and important agencies, particularly in response to COVID and the unfolding economic crisis. But I mean, your experience over at HHS, I can't even imagine at HHS right now, because everywhere you look, there's a tech challenge. You have COVID data that has to be collected, scrubbed, and then also reported in some sort of transparent way. You have telemedicine regulations, you have guidance that's going out, you have vaccines being developed. There's like everywhere you look, there's a tech project. So, I mean, where would you start? Like both President Trump and former Vice President Biden have transition teams. How would you advise them to start in terms of thinking of the COVID response over at HHS and all their agencies?
Absolutely. And I think, you know, the key elements that both Cass and Nicole talked about, I mean, those are what will be critical here as well. So I think if you think about running a command center for any sort of crisis situation or key operation that you're trying to iterate quickly, improve your process, what you want to do is you want to set up a command center. You want to figure out what nerve signals you need, what data you need to make data-driven decisions. And you want to continually iterate and build the capacity to do that. And to enable that, you really need both people who understand how to use the data and how to work with technologists, and technologists sitting right next to them, sort of saying, okay, what is possible? What is the frontier? Okay, which things are critical for us to clean from a data perspective and otherwise? So that is sort of the set of things that you would want at the very beginning. And I think there are some new challenges. So that are unique to government. So Nicole talked about data governance, and you talked about, pulling together data from across several divisions within HHS and from the states and from public health authorities. Sharing that data is not simple. It's not like a little OAuth button that you get to click, right? It's very difficult in the context of all the different privacy agreements. And most of the teams also just don't have the capacity to make a lot of modifications. So really, step zero, and to a certain extent, they've built a task force to do this, but making sure that you're sort of doing transparently with the data and how you're making data-driven decisions, making that all clear. Then you would sort of, we can get into the next level, or we can just start with the high level. But it is about engaging with all the stakeholders, figuring out how you want to pull together all your data and what technology you need to run operations, and then identifying the core things that you need to get done. I think you talked really well about some of them. If we want to scale up testing, that's going to require technology and data, both to figure out how to roll it out, and then also to figure out how you want to get the information back on what the test results are. For surveillance, monitoring, for rolling out a vaccine, there's a really complex set of systems that manage vaccines, plus this administration is building a new system. So the recommendation to either scenario would be, how do you make sure that if you are going to roll out a new system to manage vaccines, that you've done enough real world user testing so that when it gets in the field, there are not technical difficulties, but there are also not challenges where people can't figure out what button they're supposed to push or can't figure out what information. And how do you enable the team to be iterating on that system as you roll it out? So as you discover issues, how do you make sure that information is feeding back and constantly improving your performance? So I think it really boils down to teams and giving them sort of the operational capacity to continually iterate quickly.
I just want to go one step deeper on something you said. You said, like, sometimes, policymakers will say, gosh, like, okay, we just need these two. We need states to just send their data electronically up to CDC. And you said, no, it's not that simple, that there's like, explain why it's not, because I've been in the room where like policymakers sometimes will just say, gosh, like, yeah, we'll just throw it up on a website, we'll collect the data, or we'll get the two agencies to share data together. But why is it not always as simple as that? Like, what are some of the reasons?
So I'll also encourage Nicole to jump in here because she has a lot of perspectives on this. It's for a lot of different reasons. There's super simple and intuitive reasons. Like if you want to collect data from hospitals, the state might have a hospital data collection website, the county might have a hospital data collection website, and the CDC has a system. Which system are you putting it into? How do you compare those data if they enter it into one system but not the other, or if the results are slightly different in the two systems? There's also differences in interpretations of what data can be shared. So this is something that I think Nicole will would speak more eloquently on, but you could talk about, states might not feel that they can share data with the federal government. Counties might choose not to share data with the states. There's a lot of different, and some of it is for reasons of funding and other reasons, and some of it is just interpretations of what they're allowed to do with the data. There's questions about different agencies will interpret different parts of HIPAA and different parts of the Privacy Act slightly differently. But what other reasons would you give, Nicole?
Oh, I think you said it. To me, like, this is such a hard issue, but it's hard partly it's just as a matter of like the accuracy of the data, like that the data is truly telling you the thing you need it to tell you, and that you're not masking gaps or inconsistencies in the data. So I think cleaning the data so that it's standardized and consistent and telling you the right story, that to me actually strikes me as the hardest part. I'm a lawyer, not a technologist, but like from a legal standpoint, and then you get like every county and hospital with its own variation on its licensing agreement and what it thinks it can do under HIPAA, because we are talking about very sensitive data versus not what they feel empowered to share. And have go into the hands of a government or a researcher or whatever. So I think there's then that complexity on top of it. I sort of feel it's like if we had to, we would figure a way through the legal part, but the technical part of it is actually like just real hard work.
I want to bring in David into the conversation, but this issue of data just was like common throughout all the memos, like, and it was data sharing. Like I know the Department of Education's memo highlighted the fact that to simplify FAFSA and to comply with a new law that just passed at the end of last year, the IRS and the department have to figure out a way to share data. And that's been a really difficult challenge for them because I think to some of the points that Nicole was just bringing up, that the IRS is really protective of some of the privacy issues and some of the cybersecurity issues. But we saw this with data sharing in a lot of other different agencies as well. So like, I mean, what is needed to tackle these challenges? Is it really technical, or I'm just struck by what Nicole was saying, that some of this sounds like it's a governance issue, it's a legal issue, or it could be a policy issue more than it is just like purely you can't get two technologies to talk to each other. But thoughts, advice? David, do you want to start on this one and then we could go around?
Sure. Yeah, I think part of it is that, so first of all, going back to the conversation about how far we've come, I mean, I have to remind everybody that, the very first White House website was built in 1996, right? So it's not like every president has had to deal with this, obviously, but the evolution of the White House website and social media tools and communication, I mean, using technology for communication was something fairly new that when I was at the White House in 05 to 07 was something that we were still trying to figure out. And So even simple things like, trying to figure out how many people came to whitehouse.gov through a simple data analytics program that almost every website in the corporate world was using, but somehow there was this sense of distrust that when the White House was tracking how many people were looking at public pages, that somehow we were violating people's privacy by doing so. And although we weren't tracking any user data, we were merely just looking at which pages they were looking at and how often or how long they stayed on those pages. And so that kind of data was helpful. So in the midst of Hurricane Katrina, for example, we knew that a lot of people were coming to the website seeking information, not just in terms of the impact of what was happening in that region of the country, but people wanted to know how to help. And so we were using things like USA Freedom Corps and their website to help point people in the right direction towards websites that we knew were vetted. And because there was a lot of fraud going on, people claiming to be nonprofit organizations to provide money and resources and support to folks who've been affected in the region, but they actually were criminal efforts. And so we were trying to tamp down on that. And so, for example, we were receiving 6 emails per second on the White House website. Now imagine what your inbox would look like for 24 hours if you got 6 emails per second. And by the way, the 7th email was a warning that our server was about to crash. So every 6 emails and then a 7th email. So it was just flooding. And what we tried to do is figure out how to get that information. Most of it was people looking for help and also looking to help. So how do we get that information down to the area in New Orleans? And I remember there was one email that came through. It was a woman who claimed that her father was trapped in the attic as the waters were rising. And so I sent it on to Gwen Costin at Homeland Security at the time. She was running digital there. And I said, hey, listen, I don't know if this is real or not. I don't want to jump priority in terms of what folks are doing. But if there's anyone in the neighborhood who can check this out, that would be great. So a couple of days had gone by and she wrote back and said, read from the bottom up. And that email that I had sent had been sent to 5 different people. Turns out that the responders did find the person and was able to save him. And I began thinking, like, we can do a better job with connecting technology rather than just an errant email coming to a White House server that I happened to see in this midst of 6 emails per second and decided to forward to try to help someone. That was just one person. I had just returned from Disneyland that summer, and I remember there was a mobile app at the time, and you could tell on your mobile app what the lines were like at the various Dumbo rides. And they would say, hey, Dumbo ride 1 is full, go to Dumbo ride 2. And I'm like, if Disney can do that, then why can't we track how many hospital beds are open or where the closest first responders are if needed? And so seeing that technology sort of evolve over time, and technology can be divided in a couple different ways in my view too, which was, how are we serving the American people? So the services that government provides, but there's also how the American people are using technology to communicate with each other and to share information, and how federal employees are effective in their job as a result of technology. So for example, after 9/11, many people didn't have BlackBerries in the government. And after 9/11, the only people who were able to communicate was because, you remember, the cell phones, the cell lines had gone down. So the ability to communicate was limited, but those who had BlackBerries were able to do so. So there was a huge contract that was signed to make sure that folks had BlackBerries so that they could communicate in case of a future emergency. So making sure that federal employees are efficient in being able to communicate with each other is important. So those contracts also need to be evaluated.
David, something you said just now about ties back to Cass's presentation about human-centered design, which is a term of art that I know is very familiar to people in the tech community. It's slowly making its way through the public policy space, but can maybe Cass or Mita, can someone just unpack what does it mean to have human-centered design and designing for the experience of the end user? It's a term, but I'm not sure if many people tuning in today know exactly kind of what that looks like and what that means.
I'm happy to jump in with an initial stab, but then I would probably turn it over to the engineers to talk about it. But the way I always explained it, in lay language to folks in Vermont when I was trying to bring this concept forward was to say, you go to bed at night, you plug in your smartphone, it updates your software overnight, and you wake up the next morning, your software is updated. You do not need a user manual to work your phone in the morning. And that seemed to be one of the easiest ways to kind of get the message across of what we were trying to do. And what I found is that actual usability of our tools ended up really being a nice to have in almost all of the projects we were tackling. You know, it was an afterthought at the end. Like, we need to make sure that we check all the boxes on the rules. We need to buy the off-the-shelf software or the, you know, software as a service. And then at the very end, we'll try to customize it to make it user-friendly. And much like healthcare.gov, we ended up with, you know, login pages for our own health insurance exchange that I think when we measured it, it took 32 clicks for somebody to even create a username and password. So we had people falling off way in the beginning of the process before they even filled out an application.
I think that's a good synopsis. I mean, if we think about Apple and how much people love Apple products, right? The obsessive attention to the user experience and the obsessive thinking about, do people enjoy using this? Can they figure out what to do next? How do we simplify the experience? And that comes from actually watching users and working with real people and watching how they behave in a real world context, right? And so it is often the case on government websites that there isn't competition, right? So we have this notion of A/B testing out in the world where you sort of build your application and you want more users and users to spend more time, so you try a few different formulations of the website, and that helps you figure out what's the easiest thing and what drives users. We often don't do that in government websites, and often there isn't other companies that we're competing with. But at the same time, if you just put up legalese or whatever was complicated about the form on the website, it's very complicated to use and it's not accessible. And so a lot of what user-centered design is focused on is, what is the end result experience that you want a user to have in interacting with both your product, but really your service, right? If we're providing services to the American public, how do we want them to experience the service? And instead of imagining in our minds, who have thought about it for a long time, how to convey that service, it's really about working directly with users and testing it with people to understand how they understand the words on the page, how they understand what they should do next, and evolving the product to meet the user's needs rather than trying to train people to do a really complicated thing.
I'll also jump in, John, with just a observation on how a lot of our systems in government work now, which is, not only are they not human-centered design in the sense that we test with users, but the system itself is built to serve the system. In other words, it's built to create things that you have to fill in because the system needs it to appear in a certain way, as opposed to thinking what the user wants to do and the end goal of the user, the citizen, the beneficiary, whoever it is. And we don't tend to build systems that way. And the thing that I usually tell people, I was like, so literally last night, my 17-year-old ordered on her phone donuts and coffee at 2 o'clock in the morning. So put aside what you might think of my parenting skills, but that's amazing that showed up at our house at 2 o'clock in the morning. And yet single mothers have to take off a day of work, find childcare, and go sit at a limited hours government office in order to get their benefits. That's ridiculous. We should be able to do better than that.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on something that Mina said about understanding the role of government websites. There was a lot of pressure back in 06 and 07 to make whitehouse.gov into Facebook. People are like, whitehouse.gov, it needs to be Facebook. We should have profiles. We should be able to connect and share. And I remember thinking to myself, that's not the mission of the White House website, is to be a social network. I mean, Facebook is a revenue generating social network, and the mission of whitehouse.gov, in my view, was to be a catalog of the president's events and policies, to be an archive of those events as well, and to serve as an archive of everything related to the history of the White House as an institution, from George Washington to present day. And so, to turn that into something that was a social network, I just felt was not really the mission. But I think it was that sense that, hey, private sectors, particularly online, those websites are, doing some really innovative things. You should also do that here. So, but again, we had to stay laser focused, because I also wanted to make sure that whatever I built, that we were planting seeds that I would never be able, for trees I'd never be able to sit under, so that the next administration or 2 administrations after that, that we'd be moving the needle, time forward so they make it a little bit easier so that when they came in, they could do things. Whether at the time it was McCain or Obama, we didn't know, but we tried to make sure that there was some continuity of government when it came to the contracts that we were signing.
Great examples. I also think too about, I think all of us now are having more interaction with government now that we're sheltering in place. And it is amazing to me, the sheer number of websites or services that aren't accessible just from a cell phone, from a smartphone, because they were designed and built for a computer. And now you just think about all the different, Nicole, this is your point, that there's a lot of people who don't have computers. Their primary way of accessing the internet is through a smartphone. And if it's not mobile friendly, then a lot of people are having problems getting into this. I want to just, go ahead, Nicole.
Just to briefly expand on that, I think the other really important point you're making is that many people in government are not really consumers of the services that we're offering. Most policy wonk of including myself, have never been on Medicaid, have never applied for SNAP, and any great product manager of a consumer technology product now would say, and any social scientist and really anyone in marketing would say, trust what people do, not what they say. And you have to observe that. And it's hard to have the right intuitions about users when you have very little experience of those users and their experience on the site. And so making sure to create that as part of the process is really valuable.
I want to dive in to another issue that, which is like cybersecurity. So it felt like the memos and the agency reviews raised attention. On one hand, it highlighted the need to make sure, Cass said this very well, or Nicole, I think did, that government collects data and that's under trust. That people trust that when they share some of the most sensitive data about their finances, about their health in the cases of VA or over at HHS, that data is going to be kept safe and protected. So you have cybersecurity protections, but you also have, in some cases, those cybersecurity policies are the very things preventing some of the modernization. And so I wanted to just get your thoughts on how should the transition teams and the 2021 administration reconcile that tension? What is the best way at helping them modernize, but at the same time preserve and make some progress in cybersecurity too? Who would like to go first? Mina, okay.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. I think, this comes back to the thing that we keep saying, but so evolution, right? Cybersecurity. So who says this well? Parisa Tabriz, who runs security for Google Chrome. So she knows what she's talking about. She would say, I would take a great team of security engineers over a whole bunch of policies and protocols meant to create security any day. And I think you're always trying to stay ahead of the hackers at the end of the day. You're always trying to stay ahead on cybersecurity, which requires agility, it requires flexibility, and it requires great people. And most of the security policies that are built into a lot of parts of government are typically not built that way. It is there's a long checklist of things that you need to do to ensure that your system is secure. And once you've done all of those, I mean, it is a risk mitigation. Once you've done all of those, then you can sort of be absolved of some of the risks because you did all of the things. But that isn't true security as we think of it now. We mostly think of true security as, we mostly think of true security as, addressing challenges, and that's mostly a people-driven activity. And so would love for others to jump in, but I think a lot of this has to center around how we evolve our thinking about what is cybersecurity in government, and how we bring in the appropriate people. We have seen some progress on that. So in the last administration, there was really great work done at the DoD and subsequently in other agencies once the DoD proved that they could sort of do, they ran something called Hack the Pentagon, which my husband said, I can't believe they got that name through. But I mean, they really ran a white hat, like penetration testing hacker exercise. And And they found a lot of really great stuff. The participation was good, and it really proved the point. And a lot of other agencies have since followed suit. So it has created some space to implement some of these more modern practices that are really based on flexibility and continuing to move quickly. But that's certainly one thing that we've seen a lot.
Yeah, and I think the trust aspect of it is important. I mean, listen, Emilia, you talked about how we use these services. I mean, I've renewed my driver's license online. I pay my taxes online. I'm involved with a brand new nonprofit that we literally started a couple of weeks ago. I applied for it through the Virginia website. And then I got my EIN tax ID number from the IRS yesterday. I submitted it in the morning and I had approval by last night around 8 o'clock. So the turnaround on those sorts of things was really impressive to me. But I trusted the government to take the information I supplied to them to apply for these things, to pay my taxes, to renew my license, to make sure that my ID was protected so that when I went and voted this morning, that I was who I said I was, right? And so you're right. And I think, it was funny, we had a constant denial of service attacks that were constantly trying to get through to whitehouse.gov, which I always thought was kind of laughable because it's a public server. Like everything we publish on whitehouse.gov had a public audience. So even if they had cracked in, they wouldn't gain any access to some secret situation room, material. It was all public web content. But still, they could get in and replace pages, and it would be more of a PR problem that they're posting things that would be nefarious or make the president look bad or make the country look bad. But obviously, we want to make sure that CIA and FBI and all those other services that they're protected, DOD and others, like that's where we trust, because I know that obviously folks think about that every day to make sure that our adversaries aren't sitting on a server somewhere pulling data down so that they know what we're going to do before we do it. Like that's what I worry about. I don't worry so much about the data protection side, at least for me personally. Maybe it's because I'm a digital person and I've seen how it works on the inside, so I'm comfortable with the mechanisms that are in place to do that. But I worry about state secrets and making sure that our country is defended so that they don't hack into electrical grids or that, they cause problems like we see these Hollywood movies based on these kind of themes, right? Where suddenly they can get in and mess with our banking and Wall Street and everything else. That's what I worry about, because I think that would really debilitate us as opposed to the traditional warfare that we worry about. The sort of digital warfare is something that I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I think the point on the sort of evolving threat vectors, right? Yeah. Which underlines this point of you just have to have smart people, because you don't know what next month's threat vector is going to be. And I think the only thing I'd add to the points made by both David and Mina, which were so good, is not only is a really sophisticated security infosec team important to protect you, but it's actually also really important to make sure that you're not doing things that are getting in the way of your mission. And so if you read some of the memos we had, if you look at the ones, I think, Mina, you were reminding me yesterday, was the VA and Treasury, the way that data is tiered and classified for securing is actually getting in the way of them completing their mission in some cases. And so what we don't want is that these kind of static checklists actually get in the way of doing the business. And good security engineers can figure their ways around that to secure data in other ways, or to take a look and make sure it actually is something that needs to be protected. But it is a level of sophistication from a professional that you really need to have brought into government to get it right.
Yeah, and the just to put one more point on this, I think I have seen security act as a gatekeeper at times to it. I don't want to say broadly innovation, but to some innovations that we wanted to undertake, whether it was not fully understanding the implications of moving to the cloud or to open source. And I think one of the most important things, in addition to having the right people, is making sure that they're at the table early in your project planning stages. And so across the board, I think in government, it's really critical to work cross-functionally. And that includes bringing legal to the table when you're thinking about data sharing, and includes security in your project planning. And the more that you can get all of the folks at the table who might come there with various interests and concerns aligned around what the business goals are and what you're trying to achieve, the easier time you're going to have to implement these things, because then everyone's kind of problem solving together. What I've seen projects get killed by bringing in security at the very end, and then everything stops because you didn't consider the right things, and they don't, the folks don't fully understand what you're trying to accomplish, and you kind of have to start over at the end.
Cass, I want to stay with you for a second because the answers on some of the cybersecurity questions just now were about talent, hiring top-notch talent. And you just mentioned making sure that people are at the table. And so, you did a cursory sort of overview, but talk a little bit about how the Tech Talent Project is handling recruiting to try to help bring some of the best technology talent across the country and make it available for different types of federal roles.
Sure. Yeah. So we're very focused at the federal level. Obviously, this is a challenge at all levels of government across the country. And I feel like so many times in government, I just heard people say, "Oh, we can't pay enough. No one's ever going to come work to government, work for government." And I think that really sells the whole mission short. And what I think of the work we're doing is this coast to coast talent search of the best and brightest tech and tech adjacent leaders out there who are moved by this mission of public service and have space in their lives to want to give back. And I will say that in the past 6 months, the tone of my conversations have totally shifted with people. Folks who would never have considered public service, this time last year are now in a very different position. They're looking around at what's happening in the country, the challenges that we're faced with, and it's really laying bare these gaps in technology and infrastructure that we have at all levels in government. And so people are stepping up in a really inspiring way. And so what we think of what we're doing is starting a conversation and for helping to get to know people better, helping to really flesh out what helps people be the most successful in government, because it's not just, do you understand technology? It's what are your leadership skills and abilities and strengths, and can you walk into a government environment and build a team and move it forward successfully? So we're working in partnership with people who want to serve to think through those things, and then helping make sure that they have the path in that's the best fit for them.
Hey, so John, I'd like to add something on that because Cass, I love that, by the way. And one of the things that we looked at doing in end of 2005, 06 was to revamp whitehouse.gov because we knew that, the website was built in 2000. Here we are 4 or 5 years later in the middle of the second term for President Bush. And we knew, that technology had changed and we had to redo it. So I did what every government employee does is I contact procurement and I said, hey, listen, we need to find a company who could help us rebuild this and do it from the outside. And that we got all these bids and it was millions of dollars to do that. And my budget was not that, by the way. So I was presenting the options to the team and they looked kind of disgruntled. And I said, what's wrong? And they said, Dave, we can do this internally. I said, what do you mean? They said, we have the skills. You've hired us. We're designers. We are, developers. We're technologists. We can do this. Like, we're a little bit upset you didn't trust us to do it because we had hired the right people initially. I took a step back and I said, all right, well, give me your plan. And we ended up rebuilding whitehouse.gov and it cost us nothing. And because we already had the people on the team to do it. And so I remember, I tweeted something around when healthcare.gov was going and they were having some issues with budgets and things. And I said, hey, anyone want to guess how much it cost us to rebuild whitehouse.gov? And I said, 0. And the team lead saw my tweet and he said, you're a liar. And I said, what happened? He said, it cost us $30 because you bought us pizza that night on the night we launched. So, so the point is that you're actually saving money in the long run when you get the right kind of people to come in initially to serve. And I know things like the Talent Act and the Presidential Innovation Fellowship and things like that. Matt Lira did an amazing job on that towards the end of President Obama's administration. I think it was one of the last things that President Obama signed before inauguration happened to say, hey, let's encourage technologists to come take and do, a stint in the government. It doesn't have to be a full-time job, but let's, encourage these folks to explore government as a career. And even if it's a temporary time, they can lend us their expertise and then government can get better, the country can get better. And then if they want to go off and pursue a career in technology, from there, that's great, but they have the benefit of understanding the government piece of it as well. So I'm all for it.
We have 2 questions that have just come in from listeners, and one of them, David, just relates exactly to what you were teeing up. The question is, which of these recommendations are things that can be implemented by career staff within agencies, and which may be things that have to be moved forward by political appointees or White House staff? Who would like to take that?
I mean, I can start. It's both. To be honest, I think the challenge is that, I have to remind people that the political appointees only account for roughly 2,000 to 3,000 people total. I mean, 98% of the government remains the same when an administration changes. And what changes is the secretaries change and the senior advisors change and the policy changes, because now a new administration, in theory, brings new ideas and new energy. And in some cases, when a new political party takes over, it's a whole new crop of people, right? And so, but every one of us who's worked in government, whether it's career or in a political political appointee role, knows that there's one mission, and that mission is on behalf of the country. In theory, like, we want to move the country forward. We just may differ on how to best do that. But there's a lot of skills from folks on the career side, and then the political folks maybe bring new ideas or maybe a new set of skills. But the question is, how can they work together to move forward? So I think it's both. And sometimes we can get in each other's way, to be honest. But I think that they have to work together in order to be successful.
I'd be interested.
Any other thoughts, Nicole?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know what, like, Cass or Mina, I think, because I think a little bit of it depends on what we're talking about, right? Like, what system. So, like, for example, the Social Security Administration infrastructure is like, it's really old, and it's sitting on, it operates on like 60 million lines of COBOL, which is a language that was created in 1959. Right. So the question is, who do you bring in to do a transformation at Social Security? And maybe that's more than one administration, right? So maybe that's a career team that you need to build, because a political team may not have the duration to be able to get something like that done. On the other hand, like, smaller, like, discrete user facing initiatives where we're gonna, if we build an app for COVID detection or something like that, maybe that's a smaller, scrappier team that comes in, doesn't necessarily have to be a career. Part of it is, to your point, David, like, what talent do we have in-house to begin with?
Yeah. There's a related question that's come in, thinking a little bit of not just, the question is, what statute or legislation would complement this suite of executive suggestions in the first days of a new Congress? And so they said, if, for example, are there bottlenecks that congressional action could remove? And thoughts on that? That I know Congress is, still negotiating another economic relief package, but as part of CARES Act, sent a lot of dollars over to HHS to help on some aspects of modernization and a handful of things. But other thoughts on what could be in a congressional package in the future that would be helpful?
I would piggyback on something, John, you and I have talked about, which is just, clearly the states have challenges, and given that states' budgets are crunched, infusion of dollars to help upgrade systems that are coupled with, well, in my opinion, requirements for doing things in a modern way would be really helpful. When you look at what happened with unemployment and all these sorts of things, like, there's just upgrades that need to happen. State systems aren't prepared for large surges in need. And this is going to be true again if there's another stimulus deal in the first or second quarter of next year. So I think aid to states for tech would be great, coupled with some safeguards for implementing things in a modern way.
And I would add that there's compatibility issues too, right? I mean, there's a lot of different systems, and they don't always handshake well together, right? And so it could be that some versions are older. Maybe someone's using Microsoft Windows 2000 still, and so suddenly those systems don't handshake well with other products down the line that are more modern. And so whether it's states working together with federal government, or maybe in some cases it's the executive branch trying to handshake with the House or Senate systems, there's a lot of back-end collaboration there where data is being shared behind the scenes through different programming options. So I think everyone's not on the same system. Just like in the open free marketplace, there's a lot of different options to do the same thing. We need to make sure that there's some consistency, but without giving someone a monopoly on top of it. That's the challenge.
Yeah, I think there are some like big idea options too around, like, having, we've talked about having a national service corps. There's been discussion of scaling up contact tracing. Like, if you are in the reserves, right, you can be called up and you can spend time you don't lose your job if you spend some time working for the government. Should we have some sort of a national reserves type program for technologists for when we need surges of talent, and that allows them to get access to the right capacity and systems in just those moments when it's critical, for example. There's also some work that could be done in terms of expanding the number of people that are available in agencies. So sometimes the headcount caps really eat into technical staff in particular, because policy definitely needs to go out the door, and to a certain extent, the leadership in agencies doesn't always understand exactly what technical staff is necessary. So you know, a bunch of hiring authority changes and personnel cap changes also could be pretty material there.
That's great. We are right at time. And so I'm just going to thank Mina, Nicole, David, Cassandra, for all of you spending time with us today, for all the work you put into the memos, and for all the other 80+ volunteers that spend countless hours on this. For folks that are listening, that you want to go check out the memos and some of the other documents that came out of this, just go to techtalentproject.org. You'll find all the links there. Thank you so much for joining us today. And again, look forward to some of these digital opportunities being realized in the next coming months here. So thank you so much.